Hello, welcome to this summer 2020 edition of What's Cooking Rutland. It's nice to be back in the kitchen. We've all been isolating at home, and here I am back at What's Cooking Rutland in PEG TV studio. Bethany Yon with the Vermont Department of Health and part of Rutland's Nutrition Coalition that brings you this show each month. Normally I would start to introduce a guest, but since we're still in this environment of needing to socially distance, you guys are stuck with just me for the next 30 minutes. So hang on as we go through a little process here. So the topic that we're working with today, the title of our show is Cooking with Scraps. Access to food, stretching food dollars as far as we can, plus the infamous Act 148, which is looking to keep food scraps out of landfills, really make talking about how can we use all parts of plant-based food, that's what we're going to focus on today, with throwing as little into compost as possible, as well as, assuming we have time, talking about leftovers and how can you thoughtfully repurpose leftovers into other meals so that you're just not throwing away food when you really have good edible food left in your kitchen. So there's a terrific book. I've got some resources, recipes from the Agency of Natural Resources, my friend Anne Bijor, who's been doing some workshops around cooking with scraps. So I've got a couple of her recipes, as well as I want to point out a resource that's in the library book that I took out that's called Cooking with Scraps, with some really amazing things in here that I haven't had a chance to try, like cooking your banana peels to turn them into banana bread. So that was like, okay, I haven't tried that yet, but it's on my to-do list. So great resources, and I'll be chatting about a few more. But in this day and age, washing our hands, which we've always done before the show, is more important than ever. So I'm just going to take that time now with you on air for the next 20 seconds to wash my hands and talk a little bit about how I go about getting through that 20 seconds. So here we go to the sink, and I'm going to just look over in a direction. So again, little reminder is warm running water, get wet, and then soap, and you're going to lather up and be outside of that running water because you want your hands to be in contact with soap for a good 20 seconds, really getting everywhere. So between your fingers, the backs of your hands, your wrists. I've been using a lovely meditation to tell myself that may I be peaceful and happy, may I be calm and at ease, may I be safe from harm, and may I go about my day with joy. And I say that twice, and that's now, since I chatted first, been about 20 seconds, a good thorough rinse. And because I'm in a public space, while I've been in the kitchen, I know it's clean, I'm still going to use my elbow to close that off, and then reach for paper towels so that it's a one and done or a one use. If you're in another space that's not your own, you'll want to then use this paper towel to open the door before you're leaving a restroom so that you're not minimizing your contact with surfaces. So there we go. Hand hygiene in a nutshell, 30 seconds or less. So on to cooking with scraps. The first thing that we're going to do, let's see, 3 recipes we're hoping to get to. First is kale stem pesto. The second one is going to be cauliflower broccoli stem slaw. And if we have time, we're going to get to some spaghetti pancakes. So first for kale stems. So I hope everybody knows what I'm talking about when I'm talking about kale stems. So these are some lovely young tender kale leaves that I've picked up from the farmer's market. And typically when we're cooking with kale, this rib on the outside or down the middle of the stalk, we refer to that as the kale stem. And you've often seen us removing that because it's much thicker and tougher and isn't going to saute up quite the same way. I also picked up some kale in the store that wasn't quite as local, and this had like a really, really thick stem. And so the way that you do that, just to refresh, and I need to grab myself another knife, is you just take the kale, kind of fold it in half, and then just slice down that rib, and that gives you the stem, the stalk, and you've got the leaves that you would actually cook left behind. So again, I'm going to cut off this other one. So you're going to remove from your kale, which you would, again, normally do if you're making kale for a saute, kale chips. You're typically removing the thickest part of the rib. And a lot of times what we've been doing is tossing these into compost. Hey, you can actually cook these things now. So the next step would just be to cut them into like some 1/2-inch pieces or so. and this recipe says you would want about a cup of these kale stems and some cloves of garlic, since this is pesto, and then you would actually cook them. I've done that ahead of time because they need to boil for about 20 minutes, so this handle isn't bad. So if we could take a peek, you can see that I've cooked about a cup of kale stems along with 3 cloves of garlic until they were considered to be knife tender. So when I poke, the garlic, they're nice and soft, and the kale stalks are also pretty soft. So these cooked for about 20-ish or so minutes in boiling water, and I'm going to drain them, and instead of waiting for them to cool, I'm actually going to shock them with a little cold water, which will move that process along a little faster. And then, just like with any pesto, I'm now just going to load up a food processor with all of these ingredients. So the kale stems and the garlic are going to get tossed in here. And then what else are we going to toss in here? We've got some walnuts. This is a half a cup of walnuts. I actually toasted these ahead of time. Toasting just gives a more aromatic flavor, so it was just 5 minutes in a low oven since I don't have a toaster oven here. So they're going to get tossed in. A quarter of a cup of olive oil, because what's pesto without good oil? And then I love the recipe here that comes from actually Shelburne Farms. They put these recipes together, Vermont Feed. The Use It Up group is 2 chunks of hard cheese. So I've picked up some hard Parmesan cheese and 2 chunks. I don't know, we're just gonna do 2 like 1-inch chunks. This is really up to you. I'm gonna quarter them a little bit and toss those into the food processor. A handful of basil. So what's really nice about this flexible recipe, which is going to be available online, is that you're really working with the ingredients that you have, and if you don't have an exact amount, it's just whatever feels good. And with something like pesto, it's what flavors does your family really enjoy. So we've got some fresh basil here, and I think a handful is probably going to be a little bit more than one of those little stalks. So there's another leaf. I think I'll pinch this and add this one in too. And then we're going to add some lemon zest and lemon juice. Silly me, I forgot my zester at home, so we're going to do it the old school way. So handful of pesto going in, or basil rather, going in. So the juice and zest of 1 lemon. So I'm going to I don't have my zester with me, so I'm just going to do on a smaller grater, and I'm just going to go around and grate. And actually what I did first with the lemon was just to really roll this well so that when it does come time to juice it, it's really, really tender and the juices should just flow right out. Go with that. Scrape some of that in. And then cut this lemon in half, and the juices are just flowing, so no reamer, but because it's nice and soft, 1 lemon, or half. Even a few red pepper flakes are just going to give it a little zing in there. So it's just a nice variety of flavors, and we're just going to process this up and see what happens. Oh gosh, this looks so amazing. Wow. Gonna just open it up and take down the edges. I can definitely smell the cheese. There's plenty of cheese in there. And there we go. I'm going to transfer this into a bowl, and we have kale stem pesto. So you didn't have to throw anything away from that, kale when you're doing something. So tonight's dinner we're having at home is going to be kale or beans and pasta over kale, and so those stems are all going to get tucked aside for pesto on another day. So those lemons that I just tossed into this little container, you might be thinking, gosh, is there anything that could be done with those? Well, I pulled a lot of the yellow off in terms of the rind for the zest, so there may not be much, though they could probably get soaked in water and cooked to kind of do a lemonade, because I certainly didn't get all of the juice out of them. So they probably aren't quite ready to be tossed into compost yet. So yeah, so this lovely pesto that could now be used as its own little dip with crackers or vegetables or on pizza, to then actually get tossed with pasta. It's not quite as green as a traditional pesto, but I think it's because there's probably a little bit more cheese in there, and obviously the kale, the innards of the kale aren't dark green. So looks great. So we're going to put that aside and come back to that to give it a little sample. So you could adjust seasonings in that depending on what taste your family really prefers. So kale stem pesto. The other side of the kitchen for cauliflower core and broccoli stem slaw. So I already have a bunch of broccoli stems. So often the part of broccoli that everybody wants is just, you know, the green, leafy or flowery parts of the broccoli. And all these stems that sit, you know, along the stalk often get thrown away. In our house, I actually typically take all of these pieces and just chop them really finely and add them right to whatever I'm doing with broccoli, or they may get put aside to be added to soup later on. This is all great stuff here. There's no need to throw it away. But if you're not used to already taking some of these pieces and chopping them up and just going ahead and steaming them or stir frying them with whatever you're making, you could turn it instead to a kind of coleslaw. So these are my broccoli stems, and it's the same with cauliflower. So cauliflower has, you know, all of these, I've already picked off a few of the leaves from the outside, as well as then this really thick core. And again, most people are just going for this flowery part and tossing out the rest. Well, this can all instead be used. We're not going to toss these greens or the base of the cauliflower leaves into our slaw today, but these could get put aside and also turned into a hummus. So you could again steam these like I did the kale stems, and then mix them puree with a white bean and have a really lovely bean dip. So in the past, I've done a lot of any bean dips. You pick it, but you can then use these cauliflower leaves, the base of these leaves, to do the same thing. So I'm just going to put them aside. They're not going to go into my tiny little compost bowl, but that these would actually get used at another time. So I'm just going to get in here to pull out. Pardon, I am not the best at breaking down cauliflower, so many of you are going to look at me and be just horrified at what I'm doing. There's probably a better method. Just going to grab a bowl to throw those into, because we're not playing with the tops today. We're going to play with what people might otherwise typically throw away. So I am going to shave the very bottom of the cauliflower, just a little dry and brown. So I'm just going to trim that very thinly and toss that into my compost pile. And so with this slaw, we're going to use broccoli, cauliflower, apple, carrot, and just slice things really, really thinly, as well as some celery. So I've already sliced up some celery stalk with the leaves because, you know, otherwise you're going to be watching me slice things forever. So I'm going to go ahead and toss the celery into a big bowl. And again, it was a large stalk of celery. All I did was to cut off, again, the very dry bottom end, and then slice the whole thing really thinly, even including the leaves, because they're going to be just fine inside of slaw. So the broccoli stem, again the same. It's just cutting this, really shaving it or cutting it thinly. So I'm just going to get rid of the dry bottom. And I think I'm going to cut it in half, and then just ever so these thin slices. I'm going to cut some apple. The The other things to be aware of, and again, we'll point you to some online resources, is that so many folks are confused by the dates that are on different foods. Is it still safe to eat? So we'll point you to some links and to really clarify the difference between sell by, use by, expiration, and is it really safe? And a lot of times foods really are okay. They may not be quite as crunchy or crispy after a particular date, but they are still likely safe to use. So we'll point you to some resources to really clarify those definitions because, gosh, it is confusing. So the other thing that I just want to point out is with carrots. So, we've got up here the WIC code. So if you're a family participating in WIC and looking for a second nutrition education activity, trying to extend your food dollars with your WIC GAR card or Farm to Family Produce this summer, WIC Scraps 20, call that into the office and you're good to go for another 3 months. So these are carrots that are local carrots. So they're kind of sort of some odd little shapes and have a few more bumps and scars on them than usual. But you don't always have to really peel an entire carrot because that all becomes, again, something that would go to waste. So if you've got a good vegetable brush at home, you can really scrub a carrot well with a vegetable brush, and it's going to get rid of a lot of the dirt that's there. And then there may be a few dark spots that just need to be quickly pulled off. And so use a paring knife to just clean up a couple of these dark spots. We're going to grate up a carrot to throw into the slaw. And then put together a really simple dressing. We're just going to use the most of what we have. So I'm just using the top of the carrot to be hold on. If this summer you happen to get carrots with the greens on top, save those greens. They're fabulous to add to salad, a really lovely crunch, so they don't need to be thrown away as well. Reach in, grab the carrot out of the middle. So really using the whole plant as best we can. So now I'm going to just toss this around a little bit to mix it up. Really nice variety of colors, the dark red skin on those apples, and then make a little dressing. So this little recipe just calls for a Dijon mustard, oil and vinegar kind of dressing. So the mustard is going to help hold everything together. So we're just going to put a teaspoon of mustard into this little bowl. A quarter of a cup of an apple cider vinegar, or I often like rice vinegar. It's a little mild and sweet. Could also use balsamic vinegar. A couple of tablespoons of olive oil. And then you can season that additionally with a little salt and pepper. Give it a good whisk to mix it all together. And the nice thing about the mustard is it's going to help to hold the oil and vinegar together. It's an emulsifier. And then pour that on top. Give it a good stir, and then this is ready to go. It will be better if it probably sits for a couple of hours to let all of those flavors take hold. But we have a lovely slaw here that was using up foods that might otherwise go to waste in your kitchen. So I'm going to tuck this aside. We've got a few minutes left and see if we can at least walk through putting together a leftover spaghetti pancake. So one of the great websites that's out there is called savethefood.com. That's the one that's going to, I'm just looking at some notes that I have. That's the one that's going to tell you, how long you can actually keep food. And then another one is scrapfoodwaste.org. We'll get those up for you. And that's just for, again, more ideas for how you can actually use up different kinds of foods. So leftover spaghetti. I'm sure we've all had leftover spaghetti in our house. So here I've got a couple of cups of leftover spaghetti from my dinner last night, and we're just going to make the batter first and then add spaghetti. So it's a pretty standard batter. It's egg-based. Eggs are going to hold things together. So we're going to toss 3 eggs into this bowl. And then the batter calls for 1/2 cup of flour. So this has been measured. And then 1/4 cup of cornstarch. Which I'm going to need to get a spoon. So thinking about managing food waste, there's so much, I've been kind of sharing some resources, and there's just so many resources, information out there. We're hoping at some point that some of our friends from the Solid Waste District will be able to hop on to a Brock Talk show at some point to kind of do some of the information on the other side of this. So some cornstarch, a couple tablespoons of water. I'm just going to move the bowl to get to that. And a clean whisk. Batter, but we're going to be adding some vegetables to it, so that's going to thin it out. Goodness, this is really stuck in here. And so to this, we're going to you could flavor this however you want. So we're going to add about 2 cups of spaghetti. And then 2 cups of shredded vegetables. I've already shredded a cup of carrots. And then I've got that zucchini I talked about, so we're going to add that in as well. And then you can season this as you'd like. So you could go Asian and use soy sauce and sesame and garlic and ginger. I'm going to go Italian because I've got some tomato sauce with me. So I'm going to add a little bit of an Italian seasoning to it, and for simplicity, add a little garlic powder. Could mince some garlic and add that as well, and then give this a good stir. I'm going to turn on a skillet to get some olive oil heated up, and mix this all together. I know there are other recipes out there for using spaghetti, again with eggs in like a frittata kind of dish. So, but this is going to be fun to do pancakes. But whatever shredded vegetables you have around, or vegetables that can be shredded, so bell pepper. And this spaghetti I had broken in half when I cooked it, so it ought to form a little easier. So I'm heating a little olive oil in a pan, a non-stick pan. So the spaghetti and veggies are going to get held together by that batter, and we're going to plunk it onto this skillet. We'll do one more. And we're just going to turn up the heat just a smidge to let that continue. So while we're cooking these and before we give them a flip, you know, other strategies around saving food. So shout out to my mom, who was queen of this. Anytime we had any leftovers, 3 tablespoons of peas that were left, a bare scoop of macaroni and cheese, or just a tablespoon of mashed potatoes. None of that ever got fed to the dog or tossed out. Instead, she always had a big container, a big jar in her freezer. And the freezer would come out and those just random scraps would get tossed into that jar that went into the freezer. And then when it came time to make turkey soup or chicken soup using a carcass, that big jar would come out and all those vegetables would get added in and all those flavors just melded together, and that was always her secret ingredient. So, sorry for disclosing, Mom, for her fabulous chicken or turkey soup stew. So just thinking about, do I need to throw this away? Even if it doesn't feel like it's enough for a meal on another day, I can toss it into a freezer, repurpose it for something else. So these are sizzling nicely. Almost ready to turn. I don't know if you can see how it's really holding together well. I'm just following the recipe. I think I would actually put a little less than a cup in. Ooh, look at how that's nice and brown on that side. So these beautiful pancakes. If you're doing Asian flavors, you could think about what you would use for a sauce. Depending on your flavors, you could use a sweet and sour sauce. Because I'm going Italian, I've got a spaghetti and tomato sauce. So then onto a plate, and the sauce would get heated up and poured on top. So we're going to grab a plate and do that in just a minute here. So we will probably end up doing at some point in time another edition of Cooking with Scraps to play with some other different recipes. Again, trying to use every speck of food that you have in your house, not throwing it away, and being thoughtful about, before you throw it away, can it get repurposed or used in some other sort of fashion? So I hope that you've gotten some great tips and strategies from the show. We've got some yummy pesto here and some yummy slaw, spaghetti pancakes. Life is good. I know what I'm having for lunch today. And so, yeah, once these are they're nice and brown and holding together well, they're just going to come off the pan. So for purposes, I'm just going to take this smaller one off, toss it onto a pan, and a little tomato sauce on top, and then we're ready to go. So thanks for joining me. Be safe the rest of this summer. Hopefully we'll see you at the farmer's market at some point, but be sure to use everything that you've got. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you later this summer. Ooh, this one looks really good.